everybody, it's Eric Pappenfuss. It's Friday, so it must be a buy day. And today, Amanda, we are going to talk about Flying to the Moon.
Ooh.
You know why? Well, we've got a couple interesting books that came into the sort room, but tomorrow is also the Lunar New Year. And I've been listening to a little Frank Sinatra while sorting books. Fly me to the moon, let me play among the stars. And when you listen to Frank Sinatra, it gets you inspired. So it got me thinking about what was the first book to propose in a somewhat realistic way traveling to the moon. And it turns out it was a 17th century book by an Anglican cleric by the name of John Wilkins.
Fascinating.
And it was a book about spaceships and specifically how to create one to fly to the moon. This is a follow-up book that he wrote called Mathematical Magic, or the Wonders That May Be Performed in Mechanical Geometry. I like this down here where it says, the most easy, pleasant, useful, and yet most neglected part of mathematics, not before treated of in this language. So what he's basically saying is, here's a book in English. You don't have to know Italian or Latin. I'm going to make it really simple for you, and I'm going to tell you how I believe we can get to the moon in something which he called a flying chariot. You want to see a picture of the flying chariot?
Absolutely, I do.
There it is, the flying chariot, the first ever interstellar transportation device. He later sort of refined that to be maybe a little bit sleeker, but it's a similar design to what we have.
I'm seeing some problems right away.
Well, we're going to get to those problems. But nonetheless, in a chapter here, which we will describe, he says, concerning the art of flying, the several ways whereby this hath been or may be attempted. All right. Now, Wilkins, remember, he was a minister first, thought that there would be 4 ways you could get to the moon. One was the flying chariot, but there were 3 other ways, which he didn't recommend, but he decided to mention. He mentions them in the book, and I'll ask you, Amanda, can you think of the other 3 ways that John Wilkins thought you could get to the moon?
Teleportation?
Well, no. One, the help of angels. He's a minister.
That's a given.
Number 2, the help of fowls. Now, if you hadn't thought about that, he thought maybe you could get on the back of one of those big birds. And if that didn't work, number 3, with the help of wings. But he did, explain about Daedalus and others, and it wasn't going to work. So his main choice that he came upon was the flying chariot. And he goes on to describe why the flying chariot is going to work. And there's this long little bit, and he basically says, this contrivance being as much to be preferred before any of the others as swimming in a ship before swimming in the water, right? You want to take a ship. And he does say ship. He doesn't say spaceship, but he says ship. Now, there were some problems with Wilkins' flying chariot. You noticed them right away, and that was because he didn't really understand atmospheric pressure, and he thought that you'd just be able, if you could get enough thrust to get out of the gravitational, forces of the Earth, you could just sail to the moon, where you would be able to breathe naturally. Now, he thought about food. He determined it'd probably be hard to eat, so he recommended fasting on the voyage, but he didn't think about breathing. But Amanda, this is before Isaac Newton is even born. This is right after Galileo, so it's pretty impressive. And while he was ridiculed at the time, he really did propose in a series of books space travel and spaceships, which to this day had an influence as people began to develop the technology. It's a bit like that bridge we designed that couldn't be built over to Brooklyn. Because the technology didn't exist. We needed something better than sails and wheels to build this flying chariot.
Yeah.
And that brings us, now you might think that brings us to a story about, a famous scientist or rocket engineer, but no. It brings us to a story by one of our great 19th century authors, and that is Jules Verne. And you could say that Jules Verne is more important to the concept of traveling to the moon than anyone else, because he wrote this amazing book in 1865, just after the American Civil War. This is the English translation, From the Earth to the Moon in a Rocket Ship. Pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And did you know that it was so important to the earliest astronauts that Neil Armstrong, right after he, said, it's one, giant leap for mankind, he also thanked Jules Verne. And I'm going to start by quoting Neil Armstrong, because in this lesser-known quote, he says, 100 years ago, Jules Verne wrote a book about a voyage to the moon. His spaceship, Columbia, took off from Florida and landed in the Pacific Ocean after completing a trip to the moon. It seems appropriate to us to share with you some of the reflections of the crew as the modern-day Columbia completes its rendezvous with the planet Earth in the same Pacific Ocean tomorrow. And that's right. Jules Verne wrote a book predicting that a rocket would take off from, of all places, Florida, go to the moon, and then they would come back by plopping into the Pacific Ocean. He did that in 1865. Wow. Not bad. His look at the design on this book, first of all. I think it's one of the more attractive Victorian books we've ever seen. And you see that he did his rocket in segments. And it's about a group of Americans in what was called the Baltimore Gun Club. This is true. Who basically determined that they could build a big enough gun, very American, they could shoot a rocket all the way to the moon, right? And it was just a matter of size. And they built this multi-stage rocket. They shot it to the moon. And then when you get into the book here, I'll show you the title page because it's a beautiful first edition here. And we get another picture of the rocket. And there it is, from the Earth to the moon. Now, this is, again, the American translation, so it comes out a little after the French translation. But you can see the influence this would have had on American young people. Let's show some of the illustrations. So basically, it goes all the way to the moon and eventually drops the sort of thruster parts of the rocket and becomes just the capsule. That looks pretty modern, pretty prescient in many ways, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And then, Amanda, it eventually comes back to Earth, plopping down in the ocean. Does that picture look like it could be 100 years later?
Yeah,
it does. It really does. And anyhow, in reviews of this book by Jules Verne, look at the beautiful spine there, the moon playing prominently, this is when the first time ever the word spaceship is used in the English language. It is used to review Jules Verne's book, which obviously inspires Neil Armstrong, and what a great story we have 100 years later with the Apollo mission. One more book just to take it up to the 20th century. Basically, when it became clear that we were going to go to the moon and we needed to go to the moon, there was talk about, well, we better do a lunar atlas so that we know exactly where we can land. And as the telescopes got more powerful, the race was on to develop a real lunar atlas of the moon. And just as a point of comparison, this is an early American textbook from the 1830s. I'm just going to show you that in the 1830s, they didn't have a clear sense of where the moon was going. It's pretty cool. But this is what you would have read when you were in grade school. But when you got to the chapter of the moon, you could see that the moon with telescopes was very complicated.
Yeah.
But the question was, where would it be safe to land? And that brought us to this race to develop the lunar atlas. And we have 2 atlases at the Scholar. We're really lucky. But the one I want to show you today was by an astronomer in Europe called Weineck, and he compiled all of the first high-resolution photographs. Now, this is high resolution for early 20th century. Today, it may look like it may be slightly blurry, right? But he was very, very proud of his photographs. And then he plotted those photographs on a larger map. Let's get to that. And then the map basically began to develop the atlas. And this was published in many different volumes. And it was so influential that when you start having science fiction post the lunar atlas, and you write a book, say, in the 1920s, like this wonderful book, To Mars Via the Moon, an astronomical story, you begin to see that they start incorporating an actual map of the lunar surface, which is really cool. And this book, by the way, inspired by Jules Verne, they first go to the moon, and then they go on to Mars, and there is a picture of the canals on Mars, not exactly as correct as the look. And look, that looks like one of the spaceships we discussed when we were talking about UFOs. To Mars via the moon. All right, Amanda. Well, that was fun, and we are going to end today with a funny book. And I can't think of a better book to end with than a handy-dandy guide, one of the most useful ones, How to Fake a Moon Landing.
Perfect.
And if you've ever wanted to fake a moon landing, you can learn exactly how to do so in this book available at the Scholar. What's amusing about the book is that it's actually a tongue-in-cheek book, and it concludes that it would be, in fact, harder to fake a moon landing than it would be to go to the moon. So, I think that's probably true. To keep that secret among hundreds of people in the highest echelons of government, never possible.
Debate in the comments.
But if you want to fake one and get stiff ridges to put in your flag and other types of lighting advice, get How to Fake a Moon Landing, our funny book of the week. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you'll watch next week and every week, Fridays at noon, for more adventures in the world of books.